I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Rafe Mair, Canada's longest-running #1 radio talk show host, and most importantly, the #1 political commentator in Lions Bay, BC. Welcome to the show, Rafe.
My pleasure, Jim, as always.
We can't go on air without mentioning something very horrible that happened in Orlando, that mass shooting, the worst in U.S. history. We're hearing the same noises. The president very reluctantly giving his condolences. He's tried every chance he's had to change the rules and laws surrounding who owns weapons and who gets to buy them. And of course, the NRA declares, well, if those people had had guns, they could have defended themselves. Is this a rock and a hard place, or is it clear what needs to happen?
Well, I don't think that there is a quote-unquote solution, so these things never happen again. I wish that there were, but that's not the world we're in now, Jim. This is one where people are very mobile, can get weapons and so on much more easily than they could years ago. That's not to say that you shouldn't discourage it in every way you can. I look at the National Rifle Association, and it scares the hell out of me. It really does, to think that I'm even visiting a place where they've got more than one gun per person in the country. I mean, it's just appalling. Now, this is an interesting case. I mean, here's a man who is licensed to carry a gun as a security man in Florida. You're not going to say, oh, well, oh, my goodness, he went and stole a gun or something. He didn't have to. I don't know what you do about that. Is it something that's just a measure of the times, and the people have there is a sort of almost a streak of lunacy in people? Is it because they have access to it? Well, just what is it? I don't know, but it's a terrible scourge. And when you've got one candidate for president of the United States taking advantage of this sort of thing, in the sense that he's saying, well, I warned you it would happen. If we didn't get those damn Muslims out, it would happen. It's a terrible situation, Jim, and as long as we have these tensions in the world, somebody's going to do something like that, and whatever that person's background is going to be called the reason that it's happening, whether it's Pakistani or Inuit or whatever it may be. And it really is, I don't know what the answer is, but it certainly is a serious question. And I watched President Obama this morning when I got up, and I just felt for him. I thought, he was obviously so frustrated and so unhappy, and I honestly don't know. I've thought about it, but I'll tell you one thing: making guns available doesn't help. That's for sure. And I think getting rid of guns would help, would ease off the strain. But this kind of thing, I don't know how you ever stop it. It just seems to be a disease.
Well, the main weapon used, the AR-15, is the civilian version of the M16 assault rifle, and the bullets it fires are suitable for only killing animals that weigh between 110 and 250 pounds. Humans fit that category. It's a weapon designed to kill only humans. It's not a hunting rifle. It's not a target shooting rifle. Why are assault rifles available in the U.S.? They were banned at one point, but then that legislation ran out, and the Republican-dominated Senate and Congress let the law slide.
Well, it shouldn't have been changed. That's quite true. It's bad enough when you're just dealing with handguns, and when you get into these assault weapons, which are really intended for major warfare, and you have people with their hands on those and getting them easily. You're not asking just for a disaster like 2 or 3 people killed. You're asking for a catastrophe because the carnage is just so great. And obviously there is a tremendous role here for legislation. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that there isn't, Jim. I'm just saying that all of this is happening at a very, very bad time in the world. Discipline is gone. It's very easy for people to move around and to get into places like this. It also speaks, I think, to a whole new sense of security we have to have, and how sad that is. If you're a little older, you go back to airplane days. You just sauntered out to the airport, walked up to the counter, gave your name, got your ticket, and away you went. And, when you think of in everyday life, almost everywhere you go, one way or another, you've got to account for yourself. Pretty sad, but that's the kind of world we're in. If you insert into that all sorts of assault weapons that people can get easily, then you've got an atmosphere plus capability, and it's bound to result in things like yesterday, and it's just awful. I just can't imagine anything like that.
Well, there's also, I think, the national culture. From the second an American is born, they're exposed to tens of thousands of shootings on television. It seems the solution to every problem is to shoot somebody. And I just look at the Canadian-produced show Flashpoint about a Toronto SWAT team. Most episodes, they didn't have to shoot anybody. They talked them out of it. Whereas I know in an American show, sooner or later, bullets are going to fly.
Well, you can't bombard kids with that sort of stuff from their time their eyes first focus right through until they're adults without having some pretty unpleasant after results. You're quite right. And I guess lots of us have thought this all the way from the very beginning. I can remember with my children watching the Three Stooges and wondering whether sometimes they put bad ideas in kids' heads. And of course that was about as innocent as you could get. But I won't watch television anymore because I'm one of these people that doesn't like violence. It's awful, and I can't imagine it's neutral on young minds. If it's not neutral, then it's got to be bad.
Well, also, American censorship. In Canada, on television, I remember when I was grade 6, watching some show late night on CBC, they had swearing, there was nudity, no violence. In the U.S., you can have all the violence you want, but there will be no swearing and no nudity. And maybe there's a difference there just between the two nations.
Well, it could be. I remember very well, frankly, Scarlett, I don't give a damn. Oh my God, the shockwaves that went through the public on that. And then when the outlaw came and Jane Russell bent over a mirror and exposed her breasts right down to the nipples, so the whole country went into a state of shock. And you wouldn't even think about that now. So I guess maybe, Jim, what I'm saying is if you look at life now and take it back 40 or 50 years, it's hard to believe it's the same place, same kind of people, same culture, and so on that existed then as exists now. I'm not suggesting you go back to the old prudish days, but my God, we've got to a position now where young kids, if they're not taking their clothes off and not making love by the time they're 11, if all these things aren't happening, they're considered to be, something wrong with them. And it's, I'm going to start to talk like an old man, so I better be quiet. But it is kind of scary. It's pretty shocking.
Well, you're not wrong, Rafe. My nephew, when he was in grade 6, told me that kids in grade 5 were having sex. This was in Edmonton, and I had every reason to believe him.
Well, I'm sure older people in your audience will be feeling as I do. I've got great-grandchildren now. Matter of fact, I've got twin great-grandchildren coming in the fall. And you start to think about this. Where are they going? What's going to happen? How long are they going to live? And I don't get so shocked at sex. I mean, once the pill came and the danger of all girls getting pregnant was gone, there was bound to be a tremendous loosening of these things. And I don't know whose morals are right in these things, but I do know that when you start getting 8, 9, 10, 11-year-old kids doing adult things as a regular thing in, say, sex, they're going to do it in other things as well. They lose their youth. They go immediately into adulthood. They lose a great deal of pleasure of life, and it's a pretty sad thing to behold. And I don't know how the hell you come to grips with it. I really don't. Maybe it's too late. Maybe we're doomed, but it is very distressing to behold.
And it's not just access to weapons. I mean, most countries around the world have very strict gun controls, And they still have mass shootings that happen in Norway. It's happened in England. It's happened in other countries, where they do have strict weapons control. But if a person's dedicated and crazy enough, they'll do it. And it's not just access to firearms either. In Switzerland, where everyone has to do national service for 2 years and then you're in the reserve, every male in Switzerland between 18 and 65 has a machine gun at home.
Yeah.
And they don't have mass killings. Maybe they have more respect because they've been trained.
That could be. I just don't know. I was going to say the distinction between Norway, Britain, etc., and the United States is when it happens in Norway, you just can't believe it. I mean, what? In Norway? In the United States, it just now seems to be fairly routine. It seems almost every month I'm turning on the TV and watching Mr. Obama, try to explain and so on and so forth. It's become very, very, it's depressing. It really and truly is.
And,
in many ways, I'm very glad that I was born and will die at the time I am. It's very sad.
We'll have more with Rafe Mair right after the break.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, AMY, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
In Goddard we trust.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Rafe Mair. Rafe, BC Premier Christy Clark the other day went on the local news. They dedicated 6 minutes to her where she claimed when she was 13, she was walking to go work in her brother's restaurant in Burnaby, and she was pulled into some bushes but managed to get away. She wasn't hurt, and she didn't tell anybody. She's only telling the tale now because of that incident that happened in California where a university swimmer was given only 6 months for raping an unconscious woman. What's your feeling on this?
It's impossible to question somebody's story like that, Jim. Particularly now when we're all very sensitive, and rightly so, about these sorts of things. It's very difficult, even if you feel in your deepest that you'd like to ask some questions. You just don't dare do it anymore. And I noticed in the House where women, particularly from all sides of the House or both sides of the House, were very defensive and praising the Premier and so on. I don't know why, but I got to be a little more careful here, I guess, than I usually am. Let me say this. In my particular role right now, I get to see quite a few women because I'm home most of the time. If I get out, it's down to a restaurant, so on. So I know most of the women in the neighborhood. And I am surprised, indeed, I guess horrified, how many of them just don't believe the Premier. Now, I didn't say I didn't believe her. I'm just saying that is a common reaction. And I don't know why that's so. It may be because her truthfulness has not been above reproach in her political life. It may be all sorts of other reasons. Maybe women are jealous. These women are jealous of her. I just don't know. But I don't think it's going to be, Jesus Christ, be careful what you say here, but I don't think it's going to play out quite like she thought it would.
You're daft. Don't call me for a month. The death of hard-hitting talk radio. You were looking at the latest rating numbers, and what do you think, what is happening with talk radio?
Well, it's virtually gone. I mean, there are people like you who are doing doing what you do, but it's recorded, and nobody is going to come in and fire you. If you ask me a question you shouldn't ask, you simply don't put it on, and so on and so forth. I'm not meaning that you don't ask tough questions, because you do, but I'm just simply saying that there's a protection there. Once in a while, you get a fellow like Ian Jessup in Victoria, who does half an hour or three-quarters of an hour of the kind of radio that we used to do back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, into the 90s, even into the 21st century. But it's almost not there anymore. Now, I think that this has had a very strange effect. In addition to not informing people, is not informing the how can I put it, the general atmosphere of news. It's just not out there anymore. So when, for example, I criticize John Horgan, the leader of the opposition, for not doing this, that, or the other, I'm inclined to forget that when I was in the legislature, all of those things were there on your table. If you wanted to know what so-and-so said, Marjorie Nichols said, it was there. And it was tough and it was hard and it was there at your fingertips. Now, it's not, because nobody is doing it. I don't know anybody in that legislature that's in the press gallery that's asking any questions that I would have in my day considered remotely difficult. And, you can always say, well, yeah, but you guys were rude, this, that, and the other. Maybe so. But the public got the impression correctly that the people who were in charge had to answer real questions, and if they didn't, they looked like idiots, not because of the host so much. They looked idiots in front of the people, many of whom asked better questions than the host did. So the whole atmosphere has changed such now that opposition is really off in the ether. It just is not there anymore, and I don't envy John Horgan and others who are trying to fight an opposition battle when there's so little available for them with them to work for. Now, even then, Jim, I take the example of, and I think Horgan's got a lot of work to do. I don't think he understands what to be an opposition leader, and I've said all these things, and I don't unsay them. But I just look at the cross-examination he did in the House of Christy Clark on this $150,000 or whatever it was to the Haida School Board, when the schools amongst First Nations, that's the responsibility of the federal government, and lurking in the midst of all of this were relatives of the premiers. Now, I thought Horgan did a pretty bloody good job on her. What? Not according to Vaughn Palmer. They didn't pay any attention to the real issues there. It was often on a side issue of how this question is asked and so on and so forth. In other words, I hate to say in my day, but in my day, somebody like Ellen Fotheringham, Marjorie Nichols, Jack Webster, all those people, they concentrated on the situation that they knew the public wanted to know about. They didn't get sidetracked, and if you were a politician, as I was, you knew you had to know your onions or you were in a lot of trouble. That's gone. And then when it's gone, it's just gone. There is, as I say, there's no atmosphere of dissent. I feel sorry for those who are trying to be a good opposition when they have so little to work with because the press has just vanished.
Well, if you do ask a tough question of Premier Clark, she'll laugh and walk away now.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. You try that with Jack Webster. You try that with Pat Burns. Frankly, try it with me. You'd be on their footsteps. If they wouldn't talk to you, you'd editorialize. You'd have open lines on whether or not premiers should be answering these questions. You'd make their lives bloody well miserable. And you'd do it for the very good reason that the public is entitled to hear what their masters and mistresses are thinking and doing. And if they didn't respond, then you made them respond. And now there were some that were tough. Bill Bennett was tough. He sealed himself off pretty well, and he had an ability to remain quiet and somehow fend off a lot. But he got his crap too from these people, and he knew it. But it doesn't happen anymore because nobody makes them do it anymore. If Premier Clark cannot walk away from good reporters forever, that's for sure. But she's doing it.
Well, when Stockwell Day was elected leader of the Reform Party, he held a news conference the next day at the Pan Pacific Hotel, sitting in a large wicker chair on the sun deck, kind of looking like he'd just been elected king. And I asked him a question. I said, "Sir, do you still believe Jews are children of the devil?" He said, "Who sent you? Who are you? How dare you ask such a question? You've nearly violated your constitutional right to ask questions."
Oh, my God.
And I said, "Sir, we don't know anything about you. There's all kinds of rumors floating around. Please give us some background about that." He said, "If you want to know about me, read my book." He never said no, and yet in my head, I could hear, I've interviewed Diefenbaker, Pierre Trudeau, all of the prime ministers, Joe Clark. I could hear in my head Jean Chrétien saying, never did, never will, next question.
Yeah.
And I thought he's used to softball, underhand questions in Alberta where the Conservatives rule the day. And on Parliament Hill, he's going to get asked tough questions. It's about time he got used to getting them. But he never said no. And when I got back to the newsroom, I did not know it was live on CBC News World and on the CTV News Network. But on the other hand, they tried to wrestle the microphone out of my hand. And of course, there's two things. I played running back. You don't get the football off me. And as a reporter, you don't get my mic.
Well, Jim, I guess I have to appeal to not old people like me, but older people that go back and remember 20, 25, 30 years ago, and remember what radio was like, particularly radio. Television, even when Jack was on, didn't have the immediacy, didn't have the bite that radio did. Remember back to those days, and remember some of the high and the mighty that were put on the hot box, and how they reacted, and how much more you knew and understood about what was going on. Now, you didn't take everything for granted. If the host asked a question, you didn't assume that it was true, but you assumed it was a question that ought to be answered. And you learned also, I know you did this, Jim, and I did too, there are some things that you just don't go into some things because it's just, it's not germane to the issue. The fact that the guy was divorced 2 weeks ago or 4 months ago or whatever, unless it's germane to his ability or her ability to run their politics, you don't get into that. But you get into everything else and you keep plugging until you get an answer. And I think, frankly, this is something I learned from Jack Webster. Don't quit. Just because you don't get an answer, keep on asking. And I know when I went on Jack's show, if he wasn't satisfied with answers he got from me, when I went on next, I knew right off the bat what the first question was going to be. Mr. Mair, I asked you the last time you were on, I want a straight answer now, sir, and away it would go. And that was good. I hated it when he did it, but it was good for me, it was good for the government, it was good for the public. That's absolutely gone. It's not just sort of softened now, Jerry. They just sort of softened a little bit, I can understand. It's gone. Gonzo, done, it doesn't happen. There are no Marjorie Nichols writing, there are no Alan Fotheringham's writing, there are very, very few that write in the way they used to. The ones that were really good at writing are often now writing for small papers and they have sort of retired. And, Jim, it is tough on the people that are in the business because they have to make a living. They got kids in school and so on and so forth. I understand that. And so it's pretty tough for them to fight City Hall. In my case, it was pretty easy because I was a lawyer. I had a standing offer to go back to a law practice. So I was safe. And so it was very easy for me to ask those kind of questions. But for other guys and gals that, didn't have a university training or something to fall back on, and the management starts to give them a bad time for dealing with one thing or another or being too hard on somebody, well, what do? You look at your kids in school and the food on the table, and you've got to consider that. And it's led to, I think, a very pallid society. Democracy is almost gone, and it's a society where there are no questions asked if it's going to embarrass anybody who's in power, who has money, anybody who's involved in industry. I'm going to stop in a minute, but I got to say this. One thing that I can remember so well is nailing people that were high up in the industrial world and in the labor world. It wasn't just the politicians that got asked these questions. Now nobody gets asked them.
Well, nowadays there's the trend so much. Some big story breaks and they say they declined to appear on camera or to be recorded. They sent this written statement. Well, a written statement doesn't show you their face. You can't hear their voice. Are they telling you the truth? And a judge will tell a jury, I know it's okay to take notes so you remember the facts, but watch that person. What's the look on their face? What's the sound of their voice? What's their body language? That can tell you so much more.
Well, you see, in the days gone by, too, that would sometimes happen. But what would follow that is you'd read it out, and you'd say, can you believe this crap? This is what this guy is saying about the failure of his business, this, that, the other thing. Tomorrow, we're going to have on so-and-so, a business rival, a union leader, whatever, and he's going to give the other side of the story. We're not letting go. But now, let go. The guy writes a letter, and that's that. And again, as I say, I don't want to be seen as blaming all the news people and so on and so forth, because they are in a very, very difficult position. They're no different than you or me or anybody else. They've got to make a living, they've got responsibilities, and they can't go to their boss and tell them to stick it. I was in a happy position where I could if I wanted to, and I wouldn't get hurt. Actually, they kept telling me to stick it before I had a chance to tell them, but it was an entirely different situation for me, so I don't want to sound like goody two-shoes in this, because I was lucky. But, the end result, what the public gets, and this is what we're talking about, what we're concerned about, what the public gets is crap. It's better off to get nothing. I'm serious when I say, when I quit, buying the Sun and the Province, the only thing I really missed were the funny papers, and I get those off the internet every morning and send the copies up to Wendy. I mean, went down to lunch the other day, and this, a friend of mine said, would you like a copy of the Vancouver Sun? I said, I'll take it. I took it back with me, and I looked at it, and I thought, my God, no wonder I gave up paying for this stuff. I mean, it's just nothing. And when, years ago, I couldn't wait to read Marjorie Nichols or Ellen Farthing, even the ones that were after me and on my back. You had to read them whether you liked it or not. It was riveting, and it was there. They're gone. It's all gone.
One of the problems is that there are so few owners. 90% of the media is owned by 3 companies in Canada and 5 companies in the U.S. And they're so interconnected. If you're with NBC, they might own Monsanto as well, so you can't question GMOs and so on.
Well, it's bad enough right here in Canada, and I've been on this. I don't seem to get any reaction from it, and I'm surprised. But Post Media, the largest newspaper chain in Canada, has got a written mutual masturbation agreement with the oil industry, and it with the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. I've offered it to anybody who wants to get it. I've got it, and I'll send it out to them. It's absolutely unbelievable how many good stories we hear, and how we'll do that, and you do this, and you do the other thing. If that's too complicated, take a look at the proposed LNG plant in Squamish. Guess who is a partner in the outfit that's pushing for it? The Vancouver Province. All you have to do is look up on the website of the group Resource Works. That's what they are. They're the shills. And take a look down the list of their partners, and there is, would you believe it, the Vancouver Province. The people that are supposed to be holding their feet to the fire are in there keeping their feet out of the way. And when you get to this, I guess sooner or later you get so you're just, you're dead to it. There's not much you can do about it. I know that when Damien and I, we do our little paper, the Common Sense Canadian, we feel like we're just, lonely little petunias in the onion patch, as we used to say, because, well, there are other independent people doing that sort of thing, but you haven't got the reach, you haven't got, the people just aren't used to you yet, and you're pretty well alone, and it's a sad situation for the public, really and truly, Jim. I mean it when I say this. My days are over, but the people coming up, the young people, people out in the workforce, etc., they want to find out what's going on in the world. Good luck. Good luck is all I can say. You're going to find out that you can't disguise some things from not happening, but when you get rid of the people that really get into these things, and get after the politicians and so on, then you have lost your sense of what the community is really all about. And you vote by just you might as well just put a pen in a piece of paper. It's, you got me going too much here, Jim. This does really does worry me. I've been in this business most of my life and just seen it deteriorate so much, and it's a sad, sad thing.
Trump has said he's going to pull the press credentials of the Washington Post because he said they're inaccurate, so they're not allowed to cover his campaign anymore. Harper tried to do the same thing to a cameraman who asked during a photo op, "Sir, will there be another photo op before you go to Asia?" You broke the rules. You asked a question. You can't cover the trip to Asia. Canadian reporters said, then we're not going to the trip unless that cameraman gets to go. In the States, would the media have the guts to say, if Washington Post, who broke, of course, Watergate, if the Washington Post isn't welcome here, then we're not going to go along either. See how well you do without any press coverage at all.
Well, when you're talking about the President of the United States, that's pretty tough. And, you know, he is probably the next to people like, well, really bad people, but Hitler and so on. But next to that sort of ilk, Trump is the most worrying person I have ever seen this close to power. I mean, you see some bad people and some incompetent people and so on. But I don't know how the hell the Western world, will survive Trump if he behaves 10% of the way he says he's going to. And, you know, it's distressing because he honestly sounds to me like he is mad. And it sounds to me like the American public may be prepared to overlook that. And wow, that is a bit much. I don't think that Hillary Clinton is the greatest answer in the world to all of our problems either. But she obviously is so much better than Trump that there's not even any contest. I just don't know. I've never seen anybody like Trump come along before that wants to, you know, put up fences and throw out people because they're Muslims and not go to court because the judge is a Mexican or American or Latino or something. I just never ever seen this sort of thing happen. And I am very scared as to how it will play out if he gets elected. And don't kid yourself, it could happen. It's a scary time. And, you know, you just put your finger on, here's the Washington Post, along with 4 or 5 other papers in the United States and 1 or 2 in Britain, have a deserved reputation for having guts up against the big people. And, you know, he can quickly shut them up and shut them down. And that really is frightening.
Well, Nixon tried to do it to the Washington Post, and guess who prevailed? But that atmosphere does not belong anymore. Most Americans do not trust the mainstream media. Only 6% believe the national news at night. Canadians are pretty skeptical too, not as much. And do we trust our government more than Americans?
We never did trust the news, but we watched it, and most of the time later on it turned out that they were pretty accurate. But, you know, you got to remember in Nixon's time that there were people in Congress that were prepared, Republicans as well as Democrats, to stand up and say, this is wrong, and we're prepared to impeach you, and there were Republicans doing that as well as Democrats. Try to get somebody impeached in front of this Congress, unless it happens to be Obama. You're never going to get a Republican called to account by the bunch that are in there now. And that's another change that's taken place, and Jesus, I just don't know what the hell you do about it. There was, beneath it all, a sense of honor and decency in Houses of Parliament and Congress and so on, not all that long ago, which is still there with some, but it seems to have disintegrated. And it's, you know, I can't imagine, for example, you can't appoint a Supreme Court of the United States judge because it's too political right now, and there's an election coming up and so on, and people will kill that in Congress, not because the person is not well versed in the law, not because he or she doesn't have a good reputation for fairness, etc., but because he's a Republican or he's a Democrat. And it's not even subtle. It's a very, very different world we live in, my friend.
Well, look at the new president of the Philippines. Admits he was on death squads. He's told people, if you don't like what a journalist writes, kill him.
Yeah, I know. You just have to wonder what the world's coming to. And then, you know, here we have in Great Britain a celebration of a wonderful old lady's 90th birthday. And I've never been big on kings and queens and so on. But you look at the example that woman has set right from the time she was a child, her war record, the whole works, and you put that and juxtapose that against what the rest of the world leaders, or a lot of the other world leaders, are doing, and you have to shake your head, you know. You really do.
Well, the mother-in-law and the Queen have a lot in common. They joined the armed forces when legally they were too young to do so. The Queen was an enlisted person, not an officer.
Yes,
what other royal person ever did that?
No,
she can fix that Range Rover when she goes out for a drive.
Well, and Mary Churchill was in the Hyde Park firing off anti-aircraft guns, and she wasn't an officer ever either. I mean, there was a different ethic in those days, and it's gone. Not entirely, I guess. I know a lot of people are saying, "Wait a minute, I'm ethical, my family is," but in the public social sense, it's not there anymore, and it may be because there aren't the pressures to behave that there once were when we were kids. I don't know what it is, Jim, but it certainly is a different world, and I think the world has to give its head a shake.
Well, I get some very mean emails because they say I ask rude questions. I'm sorry if it's a tough question and it wasn't asked, "Please, sir, can I have some more?"
Yeah.
But, I was trained around people like you, and, for me not to ask tough questions, what am I here for then? I'm not here to do fluff.
What's the point? And,
yeah.
I often remember, and I'm sure I'm repeating it now, but I often remember the advice that Jack Webster gave me when I went on the air way back. And he says, "Mair, be yourself. Don't try to imitate anybody else. But secondly, do every program like they were going to fire you at the end of it. That's the only way you'll keep your self-respect with those buggers that run the radio stations." Well, and he was absolutely right, and he was right too. You do get fired. I found that out.
Yeah,
but,
you do.
That was the ethic in that time, and I'm very proud that I served under that ethic.
Well, I knew your newsroom was doing a good job when somebody from the government would call up and say you're biased against the government, and the opposition would call up and say you're biased against the opposition.
Yeah.
That means you're asking tough questions for everybody.
And it happened quite often.
Rafe, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Always a pleasure, Jim. Thank you for having me.
My guest has been Rafe Mair, Canada's longest-running #1 radio talk show host and Lions Bay's most prominent political commentator. You're listening to The Goddard Report at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Questions for the show can be emailed to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on The Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.